are you? Are you architect? Are you gardener? Are you freeform chaos? Scourge.
In either case, if you come up with your own campaign structure, there is one thing that both types are going to need to do. Let's try to talk about what a non-traditional campaign might look like. How I start, I think of a problem or need that I have in the current D&D system,
Okay.
or TTRPG system, and I'm like, how can I fix that? And for me, the biggest one has always been the fact that someone has to be the DM.
Yes.
And they never get to play in the campaign.
Make your arc look like a rabbit hole, because people have to go down the rabbit hole in order to...
How does that work?
You can have a very simple visual beginning,
Right.
but the deeper you go into things, the more messed up and convoluted and twisty it becomes.
Okay. What's wrong with this rabbit? Why is he so convoluted?
Well, if it's the Alice in Wonderland rabbit, no wonder.
Just dig a hole and stick your family in there. It's
Oof.
Jeez, this microphone's super high.
Was maybe the last us was like really tall?
Oh, even taller than I am now.
Are you that tall right now?
Well, they'll never know how tall I am. No, not never, but
I mean, hopefully not never.
yeah.
So it means that they never meet you. If they never meet you, then
Well, then I'll be sad.
yeah. I won't be though, because I have to suffer you all the time. Hey, look,
then
we
you
have a
guys do
note.
too.
Segue note. That's a terrible segue, but we're gonna do it anyway. You know the drill. Attention, read out loud exactly what's written on this note, or be destroyed and replaced. Welcome to Caffeine and Cantrips, the show where we talk about D&D, or else. Sup, fam? Byron number 412 here. It's been a while since we did the numbers, but hey, they're back. You happy about that, Sean 388?
Yeah, I'm super happy about that.
Friggin' amazing.
Right?
Well, guess what? We're talking about being yourself and standing out from the traditional masses. Combining our favorite things, being creative and building frameworks to support those ideas. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're talking about non-traditional campaign structures. Caffeine and Cantrips. I'm loving it.
Not sponsored, by the way.
That doesn't have to be the tagline. It could be, though. It could be. We could switch colors.
Yeah.
I look good in red and gold.
Welcome back to Caffeine and Cantrips. Thanks for joining us today. As you heard about in the shtick, that didn't happen. The note. We're talking about non-traditional campaigns.
Yes.
Specifically,
Spider-Man.
sort of how to Spider-Man. No, specifically how to do it.
Oh, yeah.
How to come up with your own non-traditional campaign if you want to.
And what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah, what is a non-traditional campaign?
Mm-hmm.
Then after
Campaign structure.
yes,
Right.
Which is
We were all
right.
about those specific nuanced
non-traditional
things.
campaign structures.
So,
And then we're probably going to talk about maybe some ideas that we might have that we might think is really cool,
of course.
or non-trad campaign structs.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There might be some negative connotation to that abbreviation, but we're going to stick with traditional.
Is there?
Yeah. Which we're going to skip around because that's what we're going to do. So I suppose one of the things that we need to do is kind of define what we're talking about today.
Right.
So what we are not talking about, halt, you may not pass, is we are not discussing specifically plot. Plot is what happens within the story. Now, remember that plot isn't just a simple sequence of events. Plot is centered generally around one moment or one question that you're trying to answer and build scenes forward and backwards to answer kind of the campaign question. But it's one that raises that question to a dramatic level that you try and answer. That's what the plot is. The plot is the story.
Right. It's a series of connected events. That
It is, but it does not just
tell a story.
necessarily a simple sequence of events, right? It can be very convoluted. It can be very kind of wide. It can be interwoven. It can be a lot of different things.
Right.
But it ultimately comes down to one key moment or one key question that you're trying to answer throughout the story.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The second thing that we're not talking about today
Jeez.
is
Short
traditional. What?
Short episode. It says not talk about anything.
We're just going to sit here in silence. Wouldn't you love that algorithm? We are also not talking about traditional structures. And when we talk about traditional structures, you're probably familiar with it, but the hero's journey, right? Hero of a Thousand Faces and all of that.
The monomyth.
The monomyth, as it were. The kind of 3-act structure as kind of told by, I think it was Plato or a Grecian playwright, who originally kind of coined the idea of exposition to conflict to resolution. We're not going to talk about the Freytag pyramid, which is what you previously talked about.
Yep.
Right? Which is kind of has your exposition, the rising action, the climax, and then the denouement.
No, good job.
Yeah, I'm still on the onion, man.
Yeah.
It's stuck in there now.
Yeah. Good old Freytag.
We're also not talking about the Frisian curve, which is...
I don't think I've ever talked about the Frisian curve.
I'm talking about the Frisian curve right now, but we're not going to talk about it later.
Oh, later. Okay.
Yeah, which is... The Frisian curve is essentially you get rid of exposition and you jump straight into the rising action and the climax of a story. So it's kind of like John Wick, where immediately you jump into action and what's going on, and then they explain who John Wick is through the different crises and through the different people that he kills.
Yeah, okay.
So you begin to understand who John is by what he does in a show don't tell, but they don't kind of lead up where he's super happy with his wife and all of these kind of fun things. So our favorite Vengeance Paladin is an example of that Frisian curve where you jump straight into the climax and you allow the exposition to come out through the different crises that do still lead up to your major crises.
Okay.
Got that one?
Yep.
Cool, because we're not talking about it. And last but not least, another example of a traditional story structure is Save the Cat, which is very much a Hollywood-esque kind of story where essentially we need to get you to like the hero for doing heroic things. So very quickly and early on, we need to develop who the hero is, and we need to give you the Save the Cat moment. So you understand who they are.
This is the good guy. This is the hero.
The good guy. They do good things, blah, 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 blah. Which kind of follows the hero's journey, but they don't necessarily have to go, change, and then come back.
A lot of the superhero movies is not the hero's journey.
I think they boil down closer to the 3-act structures.
Yeah.
Or the Freytag pyramid.
Yeah. But we're not talking about that.
We're not talking about any of that today. What we are talking about is the non-traditional versions of these things.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be exciting.
Well, okay, we'll see.
Not convinced. I'll make a believer out of him and maybe out of you. So to make you a believer, let's start with, since we know what we're not talking about.
Yep.
Let's begin with what we are going to try and talk about.
Okay.
And I would like to, unfortunately, begin with the idea of standardizing the non-standard.
So we're talking about what non-standard is.
What non-standard is, and so that we can kind of understand what it is, kind of where it came from. We gave some examples here already, or I did, of kind of what we're not talking about, because those are the quintessential standard story structures. Right? Plot agnostic, right? Story agnostic. Like you said, a bunch of the Marvel movies, a bunch of superhero movies. Doesn't matter which superheroes we're talking about. Generally, they follow kind of an exposition climax, resolution kind of phase to them. And whether we're talking about the big arcs, the little arcs, they all follow onto those kind of schedules.
We're not talking about those.
We're not talking about those. But we do need to recognize what are the historical standards and where we have gotten to up to this point.
Right.
So that we can understand what is standard and what isn't standard. Right. And so when we jump back a little bit, because it's kind of important to understand a little bit of history, there was crazy people out there like C.S. Lewis who essentially decided, I'm going to break standard story structure by having multiple protagonists.
Oh, was he the first one or something?
He wasn't the first one, but he was one of the more successful kind of authors to dive into it and find success in that throughout his series.
Right.
That's not crazy today. That's
No.
also not crazy for D&D or any kind of TTRPG because that's what we share. We are always sharing multiple protagonists.
No, I am the protagonist. You guys are just, the rest of the table is just supporting characters.
Ha 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 ha. Main character syndrome. So what once was kind of very new school in idea is now very mainstream and very accepted.
Right.
Same kind of thing. What once was very new school, I suppose, jumping a few decades forward to like Neil Gaiman with American Gods, which I believe was written in the 70s.
I don't know when it was written. It's a great book, though.
It's juxtaposition of a lot of different things, right? You've got Norse mythology, you've got Americana, you've got like a whole bunch of these different themes being smashed together. Now, today, we're still seeing this one put in use because of how widely spread the effective range of it is, because you can always mash two things together to create something new. But it feels new, right? And you can always find things that haven't been necessarily touched, right? Shout out, as we always do, to our friends over at Dimension 20 for all of the things that they do. Mashing together all of these great ideas. Yes, they have a team of people over there doing it, but the ideas themselves are new ideas smushed together.
Right. Fantasy with modern high school.
Right.
D&D. Or like Christmas, New York D&D with fantasy creatures. And
correct.
Yeah.
And the whole, kind of face out of the world and the juxtaposition of New York and like New York, I'm walking here, pizza rat. So that's another kind of example. Even multiple perspectives. So stories like the Oceans franchise, right, is a more newer kind of version of this, but Snatch was also a great one. Yeah. With the diamond and all the stories.
I'll take your word for it. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. Excellent movie. But when we start jumping around in multiple timelines and multiple perspectives of a story, kind of all winding together.
Oh, to build one story.
Is yet again a historical kind of structure that has been more accepted as we've come forward and more used, and more individuals are kind of getting into that. But it's now standard, then was groundbreaking. Right. And so when we're talking about these, and one of the things that I've kind of alluded to is that nowadays, because of our access to information, we have an overrepresentation in non-standardized items. And what once were unique items, there's now kind of not a dime a dozen, but things are becoming more aware. They're in our purview more often. So it's becoming harder and harder to really, truly be unique. Right. And that's not a bad thing. Right? Because as always, the internet is a wonderfully terrible place. Right. For all of this kind of stuff. But what it doesn't let you do is it doesn't let you necessarily become more unique, because you are one person against the entire world trying to develop that one idea. It's super tough. It's super tough, especially when we're talking about structures, not plots.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Structure is a very different, we're talking about the vehicle, not the passengers inside the vehicle, right? And so that's why it's difficult, because essentially,
like it's not what happens, it's how what happens is put together.
Correct. Right? So ultimately, we all drive cars, or most of us drive cars. Yes, some are trucks, some are vans, some are sedans, some are hatchback. Yeah, they're all cars. They're all four wheels. Most of them are internal combustion. Some are electric. Yes, we're deviating, but ultimately you can boil it down very tightly into a small definition package. And so it gets harder and harder to have a unique vehicle. Right? Because there is, yes, a lot of different variation, but it all boils down. So that's when you have to get into your custom stuff. That's when you have to get into really, truly unique things that you have to build on your own. And while no idea exists in a vacuum, right? Everything's built on something else. It still is very difficult to come up with something that is truly unique, right? Don't worry about that. I think we can put too much emphasis on the attempt to be different, and we're so different that we're just like everybody else being different, right? We harken back to the oatmeal problem, and we've brought that up a few times. But ultimately, it's okay to have that current form of delivery being kind of the same, but slightly different, right? We can put a different coat of paint on it and twist it to make it kind of uniquely ours. We don't have to reinvent the entire wheel, right? Just to change the entire vehicle. There are some things that are established that we should build on, and there is ways that we can play with it to kind of twist it and make it our own.
Right.
Right. And then, like I said, the plot is yours, right? The plot is the story that you are telling, and that's going to be super varied and super creative. So between the two, it's going to be much harder to develop your structure versus your story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, totally. It's because the structure is so fundamental and it touches everything. Everything. Right? Well, it's the skeleton in your body, right?
Correct.
They try to design a new human with a different kind of skeleton without.
It's like that crash test dummy man.
Well, right? I mean, and like, how do you make it so it still functions as a human? It's really difficult.
Yes.
Right? As opposed to just, getting some plastic surgery or, like mixing this person with that person and having a new person. Like, that's easy. Raising it well is not so easy. But you know what I mean? Like,
that's beyond the scope of today's conversation.
But you're not changing the fundamental structure of what it means to be human.
No.
Right? Like, maybe one day when you can upload your entire brain into a computer, that's a fundamental change.
That's a huge fundamental change, yes.
But it's not easy. They come up with something else.
Correct.
Right? That's still human, but is structurally different.
Yeah. And that's why I said some things have aged well, some things haven't, right? And there's nothing wrong with traditional story structures. Right. There isn't anything wrong because they have been proven over time to be very effective at what they do and what they are. But really, I think one of the ways maybe that you could be super effective right now.
Yes.
Super effective is if you do a 360 no scope, hammer elbow right on that mouse and click the like button. Do it in a non-standard way. Treat yourself. Get a little dance in there.
Right. Well, you can do it as many different ways. You dress it up that like and subscribe clicking as much as you want, but to change the fundamental structure of the like and subscribe button and what it does, much harder.
Yeah, and YouTube won't let you do that.
No, I wish it.
But this is like a slam dunk competition.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't, the ball still ends up scoring 2 points.
Right.
Right. But you can do it real fancy.
Is it still, what if you slam dunk from the 3-point line?
If you don't touch the ground between the 3-point line. Yeah.
Is it still 3 points?
But I don't think even Jordan's iconic, like his big air move thing. I don't know. Is there somebody who could slam from the 3-point line?
Change the fundamental structures.
Does that technically count as a field goal, or is that a?
That's a different sport.
Yeah.
No,
and
I think
we
it
are
would.
not sports people.
No.
No.
Really, just roll acrobatics high enough.
I was going athletics. Athletics. To jump distance is athletics.
Well, I guess so.
Yeah.
You have to. If you're flipping off someone else's shoulders, I don't touch the ground.
But I think the piggyback was outlawed in some form. Anyway, we digress. Yes, thank you for coming and checking us out. We're going to keep talking about non-standard things. You non-standardly click that. Hit the subscribe if you haven't already and you like what we're talking about and you want to develop your own flow, because that's what I'm about to talk about next. Otherwise, keep listening. Maybe we will earn that sub.
Yeah.
But like I just said, I do think that when we start stalking, when we start talking about
tart stalking me,
non-traditional structures, we need to build our own flow. Or
if
you
want to come up with
your own flow.
Right.
Yeah. And so
Good luck with that. End the video. End the video.
How do we do that? I think for me, and please feel free to jump in. For me, a lot of story structure questions can be answered when we begin normally with the end in mind. In this case, we begin with session 0 in mind.
As always,
go to your rubric of what is session 0, what you are explaining, what are the questions, and what are you going over. Hidden in there is a lot of the questions that you can ask yourself when developing a non-standard story structure.
Okay.
Because yes, a lot of the questions are about theme and plot and like difficulty and all of these things. We've covered these things before. But what we can do is in answering those questions, we can figure out whether these new ideas that we're trying to build will be a great vehicle for those or they won't.
Okay.
Right. And we're going to get into some examples afterwards.
Okay.
But when we're talking about these themes and we're talking about the characters fitting and we're talking about what we want to see, some of the story structures are going to be stronger candidates to convey those stories than others.
Okay.
Right? If we are just doing an exposition based campaign, let's say, right, where it's a political intrigue. There's not a lot of combat. It's going to be mostly skill checks and whatnot.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Then the kind of Frisian curve is not going to work. Right? We're not going to jump into action and then find action in action. Are we just going to have like witty bard battle after witty bard battle after witty bard battle?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. Is that going to be entertaining? And
psychic damage. It could be very entertaining.
It could be. But then
right?
I think that we're looking at something closer to a Shakespearean play at that point, right? Where you need well-written, quippy comebacks and, good jabs.
Look at that movie. Was it 8 Mile? The Eminem story?
Yeah.
That's all it was. Just two bards just barking at each other. That's what it came down to, right?
That's what it came down to, but it was a lot more than that. It's a story about how he overcame everything that was against him and took on the power bards of the area or the college, I suppose, of the area.
He did go to college.
He did.
The college trained bard.
I don't think he did go to college, but anyway, we all know that he had mom spaghetti. That's the one thing we
Who hasn't had mom spaghetti?
Yeah.
Because it's all in a shirt.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So anyway, nonetheless, I think when you begin with session zero is going to explain what's going to be happening in the plot and in the story, and we can build the vehicle to best transmit that to the players. And if we don't find that one of these vehicles is great, then that's the point where we start creating a non-standard or a modification on a standard to something that will suit our particular message or our particular question better. I also think that one of the main things when you're trying to come up with these is you need to work forwards in your creation and then check backwards to make sure that what you're doing is in a progressional state.
Right.
Right. And make sure that everything does lead up and lead in the right direction. And you're not kind of going a little bit of over there and a little bit of over there and a little bit of over here. And then you look back and you're like, well, I thought this was going to work, but it's so disjointed.
Right.
I can't sew all these parts together.
Right. No, I was just thinking about your comment about starting with session 0. I feel like session 0 is too close to when you start an actual campaign. If you're designing your own flow, like you're designing your own structure for your campaign, this session 0, whatever this group chat is, should happen way before session 0, I think. Like at the beginning of when you start designing, right?
Oh,
session 0 should be after you've designed it and you're like, I think this is going to work.
So that's my point, is that you are not having session 0. You are thinking ahead to the questions that are going to be asked at session 0.
Right.
That will then create
sense.
Information for you to build the vehicle to suit the story then.
That makes sense. Thanks for clearing that up.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So don't have session 0 with nothing planned and be like, so what do you guys want to play? Red Taurus? Here we go. No, what I'm saying is use the information and the ideas that would normally be expressed in your session 0 or having the answers asking the questions to then generate the answers creates the information that can then allow you to build your vehicle customized to what you are doing.
Oof, okay. Yes.
Mouthful, but that makes more sense then?
Yep.
Okay.
No, it doesn't know.
Sorry about that.
No.
My perspective apology.
Probably me not listening.
Oh, active listening.
Well, clarification questions.
Nice. Throwbacks all around. One of the other things that is great when we're doing this is kind of the ideas. Hemingway coined it, write drunk, edit sober. Right? That's that. Don't be afraid to keep going forward and keep pushing
Right.
forward with your ideas,
Right.
and then come back and edit, realign,
Mhm.
double check them afterwards. It's more important that we create something or that we start going down the path to explore something than it is that we create nothing and get stuck in our own analysis paralysis and get kind of stuck.
I do that a lot with this podcast. I'm like, Byron, I have this idea here. Blah. And he's like, that doesn't make sense. That's really stupid, Sean. And then we work something out. Then we have like the episode on trust or something.
Yeah, which did really well. Thanks, guys. But yes, I think that's a fair idea. Is that you go blah, and then we go, okay, what is that? Can we create anything useful out of this? Can we polish this up? And then we find the elements or the components, and we make something better out of it.
Yeah, usually there's something here.
I don't know
what it is. Help me edit it to something good.
Yeah. Now remember that we are building a vehicle, so we do need a plot. And without a plot, there's no story. So I know today we're not talking about plot, but keep in mind what your plot is and what your story is going to be. Because when we're creating the vehicle, once again, there are things that will work great for it, and there are things that won't work worth a damn. Right. And so when we're testing and creating this kind of stuff, we need to think about that a little bit. And I guess we could talk about that later. But really, when we're trying to do this, do keep in mind that you are trying to tell a story. We're not trying to create a complex puzzle of a structure that people have to follow in addition to the story, unless you're up for that, in which case...
Just wait till I start talking here.
Yeah, you're not allowed to talk yet. And with this idea, when we're trying to create new things, remember to play with it. And we've talked about play before, like true playground play. Forget the rules. Just start being creative. Don't let things hold you back. Puke out a few ideas and find what's useful in there. And just let that freeform thought really kind of move forward with you. And when you're designing your story, when you're designing that plot, allow some of the elements of your story to perhaps inform some crazy ideas on how you want to structure it.
Okay.
So I've thought about and kind of done some reading in my own kind of story making.
Right.
And looking at things like biomimicry. Biomimicry.
Okay.
So this is in technological terms, this is like when Japanese engineers changed the front of the bullet train to mimic the beak of a kingfisher bird because they saw that it would dive into the water and create relatively no splash. And they're like, there has to be an aerodynamic property that we can, and so then they increased the bullet train efficiency like massively because they mimicked the natural shape of something else.
Well, it allowed them to go through tunnels without like destroying everything.
Without the shockwave effect and everything, right? So it changed the way things happen because they mimicked something that was already in nature. So things that you could maybe do with that are like, if you're having a pirate campaign, try and recreate the story structure to follow waves. Waves come in sets. I don't know if you knew that. Waves come in sets, generally 3, 5, or 7 waves.
It's all math, that's all.
It is all math. It's all about the diffusion of energy and the slow frequency and the heavy frequency, blah, 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 blah.
Stick that in your campaign structure.
Stick that in your campaign. Surfer physics is how you're going to base your campaign, right? That's cool. Maybe you want to do that. Maybe you want to do sky pirates and you want to do clouds. You want to look at the formation of clouds. You want to look at the formation of a hurricane. What natural elements come together to reinforce, destroy, blah, blah, blah. Take that inspiration to then create a structure that is non-standard. How you would do it, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that is, you're going to be finding the inspiration of that to adjust your structure to follow these sorts of things, right?
Okay.
Whatever you're going to find inspiration in, when we'll talk about kind of stuff that we've thought about as well.
Yeah.
But whatever you find inspiration in, that's where you can jump on these things. Thematic response. If you're doing a mystery story, make your arc look like a rabbit hole because people have to go down the rabbit hole in order to...
How does that even work?
Well, you go down and then there's additional information. And the further you go down, the more information there is.
Okay.
Right? And so you can have a very simple kind of easygoing visual beginning.
Right.
But the deeper you go into things, the more messed up and convoluted and twisty it becomes.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Structure.
wrong with this rabbit? Why is he so convoluted?
Well, if it's the Alice in Wonderland rabbit, no wonder.
Just dig a hole and stick your family in there. It's
Oof.
all you need to do, rabbit.
Oof. The other kind of way that you could do it is recreation of art. And I think recreation of different systems and things going on. So if you wanted to create a story structure based on capitalism, maybe base your structure around Monopoly. Or if you want to do expansion, base it off of Catan. Or Settlers of Catan, I think is their full name.
Yes,
Settlers of Catan. Take elements of that and build that structure to show how your story is going to evolve. Right? Yes, this sounds a lot like taking it for plot, but what we're talking about is structure.
Yeah. We're trying to win the battle. What's the artificer doing? He's just building a road. Yeah, but he's just pushing down sheep onto the ground.
He's building it out of kobolds, guys.
He's like, it's Catan, guys. Don't worry. Just trust me.
I'm going to snowflake this bee. There's ways of doing this where we can think of weird abstract concepts within the story, within the plot that we're telling, and we can base our story structure to fit that so that there's this weird self-exposition when you break into the meta game portion of it. When you're talking about it, people can see kind of the mimicry or the mirror effect of the structure to elements that match in what you're dealing with. This is like super high conceptual level.
It's interesting because you talk about biomimicry, but the idea of mimicry is interesting because D&D has its own traditional structure.
Absolutely
right?
does.
That's narrative or not, like that's unique, sort of, maybe not so unique, but that's definitely for D&D, right? But if you take other games, like board games, and because every board game has a very specific structure on how that game is played, and they're typically somewhat unique. If you take the structure from those, and then try to adapt it to 5e, it'd be interesting. Like you talk about talking about Catan or Monopoly, or like Hungry Hippos. Like how would that look like in a campaign setting? Right?
Hungry Hippos is pretty adept to every campaign that's ever.
Well, it's just get all the loot as fast as possible. The BBG's also doing the same thing.
Yes. Now all of these are based in. Oh, sorry.
No, but look for, I guess, structures in all sorts of places because everything that humans build tend to have a structure.
They absolutely do, which is almost a great segue because I was about to say second last thing that I want to talk about here is freeform. Right. And I would call it freeform chaos because it is not how I do things. I cannot,
you like your rules.
I need some structure or scaffolding, whether that's conceptual or physical, to get to the place that I want to go. And I need to build a solid foundation in going there so that I can trace myself backwards. I can't, or I don't, and have not practiced and probably will never practice kind of creating the cloud, like an internal thought cloud, and just meandering around until I find a few things to connect and then bringing them together. I know that's it. We think very differently. Right. And whether you want to call that, I call that the artist's brain, right?
Yes.
Versus whatever brain I have. I'm not going to say those bad words on here, but the what is there is just, I think, a function of what I am good at and what I can control and what I can't, and I stick to my lane in that particular kind of thing. And so I call that freeform chaos, and it's kind of like an adherence of non-adherence. Like I'm going to stick to the idea of not sticking to anything and just kind of float until I find. And I don't know how it works, but because, like I said, it's completely alien to me.
Like freeform thought process on how to create stuff.
Yeah,
that's a weird one. I don't know how it works either.
Yeah, okay.
Usually it's like it just comes to me because it works in the background, and you're like,
right.
Oh, I think this is interesting, and I have no idea why. Right, and I need to work backwards to figure out what that thing is. That's why I talk to you about it. Right, I'm like, what do you think of this? It's not fully formed,
and then
yet.
I build the road.
We need to, and we get there together. Like I kind of go backwards, and you kind of go this way, and we're like, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? And then we sort of talk.
There it is. That's a great idea.
Here's the path. Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Whereas I figure, like, usually I'm like, I know what I want. I don't know how to get there in a way that makes sense. Right. And that's my artist's brain. Like it's just sort of, like you said, the clouds and the weird spider webs just sort of come together, and you're like, oh yes, cats are the most evil thing in the world. Why? I don't know. but I feel like that's the truth.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out it's the opposite of sort of the concrete thinkers. Like
Correct.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I think you have to ask yourself, and so I'll ask Sean because he's here right now. There's really two types of people then. There's architects and there's gardeners. Architects are the ones that are building these structures, right? Like myself, that are going out and building a framework and then kind of completing those ideas by fleshing them out. And there's gardeners that kind of seed the ground and see what grows to them, see what they can kind of like, what comes up out of the ground at them. You might be a mix of both of them. I know in plot wise, I'm definitely both an architect and a gardener, strongly in the middle. But as far as story structure goes, I am all the way architect.
Right.
I don't know what you would be.
I like a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I find if I start from the beginning and just go somewhere, I don't like it because I don't know where I'm going. Right?
Yeah.
Start from the beginning, going where? I don't know. And I hate that. I'd rather be like, this is where I want to be. How do I get there from where I am? And where am I? I'm nowhere right now.
Yeah.
So I need to sort of work my way backwards. And once I get to the beginning, I'm like, wicked. Now we can go.
Right.
That's why it takes me like 3 months to come up with a character. Because I need to think about the whole character first. Like, and then I can start doing all the details.
Right.
I'm like, no, this grappler dude, I think it's going to be really cool. I don't know why, but let's think of the whole concept first.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Which is awesome because that one only took you like 2 weeks. But it took 3 months of thinking about a different character for you to create that other one.
Because Goblin's wicked.
Goblin got in your head.
Yeah.
But yes, no. So what are you? Are you architect? Are you gardener? Are you freeform chaos? Scourge.
In either case, it doesn't matter which. If you come up with your own flow, your own thing, your own campaign structure, there is one thing that both types are going to need to do.
What are they going to need to do?
They need to commit to nothing, test everything.
Oh, hey, good. I kind of poked at that.
Yes. So you got your cool idea, right? This structure that you're like, oh yes, it's going to be awesome, right? And you've thought it out, or you've built it from the beginning to the end, or you built it back from the end to the beginning.
Yep.
And you think it's cool and it's going to work great. The thing is, there is going to be issues with it.
Yes.
At this point.
Yes,
right?
there is.
Even though you spent months on it, figuring it out, and like writing out your own little document on how it's going to work, there's going to be issues with it. No matter what, unless you're like, no matter what, there's going to be details that you have not thought of, right? Like different sort of contexts that just weren't in that big picture that you were designing, right? There are going to be unexpected player behaviors when you do it in real life. Like, and every DM knows this.
We do.
Even in the most traditional systems,
Yep.
there's still unexpected stuff that people do. Like, why would you, right? You have to deal with that. But in the case when you design your own campaign structure, that can really throw a huge monkey wrench into your entire campain.
Well, just think of every video game released ever.
Right, and the speedrunners.
Well,
like, what did you do? You just slid through the ground, and you just skipped the boss. And
you just duck, jump, weapon switch at the same time, and the game just let you win?
Right? Yeah. Right? There's going to be those things, right?
Yes.
And there's also going to be systematic problems in your system that you didn't see.
Yes.
That you cannot see.
Nope.
And the only way to find out what these sort of details are, what these unexpected behaviors are, and systemic problems that you didn't see, is by testing it. Right? So by testing it, what do I mean? I mean, like, you write out your system and your structure like you would a PHB or a DMG, because that's what it is. Like, when we talk about a structure for a game, for a campaign, that's what the PHB is. The combat is a structure, right? Is like a campaign structure, really, because that directly affects how the campaign is sort of built around. RP and all 3 pillars, that's all structures.
Correct.
Go into a campaign, right? So when you're building a new structure, you're kind of building your own mini PHB.
Okay.
Or or maybe an addition to it.
Yes.
Right. So you want that written out somewhere, right? And then you want to scope out an example of it, a test, as small as possible. Like you want the minimum viable scope that you can get away with in your test, and then get your friend to do it with you. Right? If you don't have a friend, do both of them, both sides yourself. Just role play. D&D, TTRPGs, right? Role play both sets.
Well, you can just let the dice also tell you what's happening
if you're using dice.
If you're using dice,
right? But
if you're playing rock paper scissors, it's gonna be a while.
Get a friend, get a partner, get another DM, someone that you can test it with, right? Because you're not going to be able to find unexpected behaviors. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I got out of the warrior cycle.
Yeah. That's a different Sean.
Yeah, it's warrior Sean.
Yeah. But no, get someone else for sure. You're not going to be able to find unexpected behaviors unless you have other people test it out with you. Right? Because you cannot do it because you know the system, you know what it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to work, and you're biased.
I think it was Einstein that said a problem cannot be solved with the same thinking that created it.
Yep.
Right? You're probably going to be too close to your own work and too symmetrical with it to figure out what's janky. Because you may not have explained something, right? And to everybody else, they're like, oh, these 2 points don't connect. But to you, you're like, oh yeah, of course. It just makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Quality assurance, like testing programs.
Yeah.
I remember writing these test cases and people were like, why are you testing that? Like, users are never going to do that. I'm like, they're totally going to do that.
Is it on the screen? They're going to push it.
Right. Someone's going to, and they're going to be mad because it's going to erase all the data.
Yep.
Right. So you gotta. Right.
Yes.
The people do crazy things. Get someone to test it with you, someone to talk it over with, right? Because they'll catch details or catch places that you need more detail. They'll think of things to do that you would never think of.
And ask them to. Right? Be clear in your request. Hey, I need to stress test this. Don't just accept what I'm saying.
Yep.
Challenge me on stuff that doesn't make sense. Or if I've made too much of a leap, say, whoa, wait, explain that. Did you explain that?
Exactly.
Is this a gap?
Yeah.
Right? Tell them to be critical. Tell them to be analytical.
Well, give them the document. I'm like, can you understand this?
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to explain your system to everyone who's playing eventually.
Maybe.
Right.
This is one of those behind the scenes kinds of things, right?
But test it. And you do it once and you will be surprised.
How terrible it is.
And frustrated.
How terrible it is.
About all the nuts and bolts that fall out of your system.
Yeah, it's not terrible. It's just in progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one time is not good enough because you're going to go and you're making changes to fix those, right? To flesh it out. And you can test it again. And different nuts and bolts will fall out. And you do it again and again and again until hopefully it's in a place that's good enough that you can play. Right? But you have to, because if this comes out if you do session 0 right away and you just make it up, like there's going to be problems if you don't test it.
Right. And I think the farther away you go, this is just like our trust conversation. The farther out you go, I'm going to go this way because it's more visually appealing to the camera. The farther away you go from standardized practices.
This way, I go this way.
Yeah. The more you're going to have to test it.
Yep.
Right? If we're just juxtaposing and smashing 2 different genres together or 2 different ideas together and then building something out, it's not difficult to kind of understand that we haven't changed anything fundamentally. We've just created a different structure by saying that we're going to be doing cartoon plus super violence. Okay, great. So when we hit those areas where the 2 intersect, then it's easily to understand. The test cases are very simple.
Yeah.
The farther divergent we get and the more conceptually divergent we get, the more testing and the more comprehension, the more time it's going to take to do it.
Right.
Yes.
Or the moment you say, no, we all play like Looney Tunes cartoon characters, fundamentally changes things, right?
Correct.
Everything, because you can't die. So then how does that work? How does that change everything? I don't even know. Just coming up with that idea, like you have to test it out.
I agree.
Yeah. Testing is super important. And one thing that we need to test every time, I think every episode, the thing we need to test is the like and subscribe button.
Oh.
Yeah. And we need your help out there to do it with us.
Yeah.
So please.
Because you are our friend.
Yeah.
And we need you to help us out with our system and shake them bolts loose.
because we can't click the like nor the subscribe button. We've tried. We can't subscribe to your own channel.
No, they force you to subscribe to yourself. I want out. They won't let me.
Let me out.
Hmm.
But yeah, so once you do that, I think let's try to talk about maybe what a non-traditional campaign might look like.
That's good because I have some ideas.
Some ideas, right?
Yeah.
I have one.
Then you should go first.
Yeah, how I start typically, I think of a problem or a need that I have in the current D&D system,
Okay.
or TTRPG system, and I'm like, how can I fix that? Maybe I can. If it's fundamentally a structural problem, then maybe we can go that way. And for me, the biggest one has always been the fact that someone has to be the DM. Like one person is always the DM.
Yes.
And they never get to play in the campaign. Right? As a
PC.
As a PC.
You definitely get to play in the campaign.
Yes, but not as a PC, right?
Correct.
And there's a distinct pleasure
Oh,
in playing a PC in a campaign.
correct. I have an idea about this, but yes, keep going.
Right. And almost all my thinking when it comes to D&D and changing it is trying to solve this problem because it's a really difficult problem to solve,
Mm-hmm.
I find.
It's getting simpler with the advent of AI.
But as you said, it's not there yet.
It is not, and it never will be.
I think it will be. But one idea is something called that I just made up. I don't know if it's new or anything. Probably not, as we said. No idea is new. But tiered gameplay.
Oh, lots of people cry in my games.
Not that kind of tier.
Oh.
Like leveled tiers.
Yes.
Play. So normally D&D has two tiers. We have the world tier, which is played by the DM.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the character tier, which is played by all the PCs, the players.
Okay, yes.
Right? And then basically it's those two tiers interacting with each other that creates the story.
PCs interact with the world interacts with PCs.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Right? DMs interact with the players, and that's it. Right? At those two levels. This 3-tiered play is sort of what I was sort of conceptually thought of. Like I said, this is just a nugget here. I don't know how it's going to work.
Okay.
Right? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let me know. What do you think of the idea? Let me know, right?
Okay.
So basically you have an extra tier. Instead of just world and PCs, now you have also organizations in there too. We've talked about organizations lots.
Yes.
In our podcast. And what happens is the DM plays the world.
Right.
The players still play the player characters.
Yes.
The characters, right? And each player also takes a role as an organization within the world that they can play.
Oh.
That they control. Right?
Oh, okay.
And then so they so an organization is something like, say, the Thieves Guild. Right? Maybe in a certain city, maybe it's across many cities. They have the organization is much like a character, right? Has its own sort of goals, its own sort of ways of achieving those goals, its own sort of characters and structures within there. And then the organizations also take turns to do things that further their goals. And the players control the organizations all at the same time. So I control one organization, that player controls another organization. And then maybe the DM has its own personal organization as well, right? So then...
Oh, the DM has their own.
Maybe. It's up to you. But probably all the other organizations.
Oh, so they get to kind of play a little bit.
Right. At that level.
Mine wins.
Wow.
Well,
They're still the DM, right?
No, it's...
And then you have...
They are the DM.
Right. So then they have their organization turns, like country turns. Typically probably in between sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then the DM sort of adjudicates what happens between all the organizations. As the organization's like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. This organization does this. Right? And that'll affect the world. That'll affect the players, perhaps, or the PCs. Right? And then the pros of this sort of system the world becomes super dynamic, like really dynamic now, because we have these major, minor, whatever organizations
Right.
doing things in the world in a scope that's much larger than a character.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. The DM gets to be like, oh, interesting, and also react to those sort of the world changing that's not under his control in these spheres of influence. So that's interesting. It's like it's a way of playing the world now, right? Because that's their character. And the characters have much more ability to affect the world as well, right? And so that emergent sort of narrative that comes out of the dynamics between all the different organizations,
yes,
can create something really interesting, right?
Yes,
unexpected by all the players, DMs included, right?
I agree.
So then it's in that way the DMs get to play more in that sort of not quite a player, but still kind of like a player. The thing is, though, the cons are, I think, for the system is that you need a super clear line. All the players need like a razor sharp, clear line of the difference between the player character and their organization that they're playing. It needs to be, because you'll ruin it. Because what, like, oh yeah, my thieves guild, all they do is they help the party. My character specifically, like that's not cool. That should be against the rules almost, right? Unless there's a good reason to do something, right? That you need to be able to separate that meta of the two characters.
Okay. No,
that's the crux of it.
I'm making aggressive faces, as you would say, because
unnecessarily aggressive.
No, these are necessarily aggressive. Because I'm thinking. Did you have any more cons?
No. I mean, there's a lot of cons, but that's all I got so far.
That's your primary? Because if we're talking about it, this would clearly, in 30 seconds or less, this would clearly blend well to a regular game of D&D plus an organizational West Marches game, where you establish the West Marches game turns in like weeks, whereas your sessions move as your sessions move. And then every organization is doing one thing, yada, yada, yada. Okay, great. One thing per week. Okay, great. The DM should run the PCs. Maybe you have one of the PC characters, or the players, sorry. The PC's characters, no. One of the players playing a PC can be kind of the quote-unquote arbiter of the organizational turns.
Yeah.
Right?
ODM.
So they can watch the interactions, and then they're speaking on behalf of all of the organizations to the DM. So the DM doesn't know essentially which organization is asking for what. And then they can kind of give the report to say, this is what happened.
Right.
These were the conflicts we rolled out in the open, blah, 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 blah. Additionally, if you make in your initial web that we talked about before with like the 3 NPCs, blah, 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 blah. If every player creates an organization that their PC is not allowed to be a part of. But every other PC needs to pick an organization to be a part of. Right? So you can't pick your own. You don't necessarily have to go one to each of them. There can be unrepresented ones.
Right.
But just a way of bringing those organizations to the forefront.
Right.
To be actively involved with the PCs while simultaneously a thing that exists.
It'd be really interesting if you don't know who is in charge of what organization.
That would also be
you
great.
all submit it anonymously to the DM, and the DM, well, at the next session knows what's happening, right?
That's also very cool.
Right. And then you're like, oh, well, what's going on? Like, no one really knows what's going on.
Yes.
Because
and everything's submitted in writing. Everything must be in like Arial or Arail or whatever, Times New Roman, 12, single space. Well, like everything's got to be uniform. And you just hand it in. Somebody shuffles it, passes it off. Okay, great.
And then next turn, it comes when you get your report for organization. Like, this is what's been going on.
Right.
This is what your organization knows what's going on and what it tried to do, how it went, and then you submit again. Yeah. So you don't even know what's happening with the other organizations.
No.
Might be really fun.
It could be super fun. I want to play it now.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. If you guys out there, what do you guys think?
How would you do it?
How would you do it? Is there any problems? How could you make it even cooler?
Yeah, because systemically, you're not changing much. You're just adding more in the middle.
Yep.
That's off-table stuff. And then the DM has to do
it's another layer, right?
Yeah.
Another tier.
Yeah, I like it.
Right? So I like it too. Because it's not completely changing everything.
No.
It's easier to sort of manage.
When it allows the players to have more agency
Yeah.
and more choices without actually affecting the PCs,
Mhm.
positive or negative.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, no, I like it.
Right. And the DM could,
The DM too.
so it's fun.
DM agency.
What? DMA. Anyways.
That's a dyslexic damn.
More. It's a good idea. Another idea I had though
Yeah.
is something I call discover the answer.
Oh.
And this does fundamentally change. I just hit the mic for those guys who are listening. Yeah, 1-0. Discover the answer is basically instead of a DM again solving that is that trying to solve that question of how do I make it so that it's not just one DM all the time, right? Is what it is questions. You ask a question and you discover the answer together. So basically,
this is kind of what we said for a plot.
Yeah.
What is the question that you're going to try and
Kind
answer?
of, but you start with, say, the first session with nothing. Right? So then every player submits a question to the pot.
Okay.
Right? That pertains to the story, about the story. Like maybe the first question, one of the questions might be like, how do the 5 heroes meet?
Okay.
Right? Or another one might be, it used to be 6 heroes, but now it's 5. What happened? Right? As the first question. And there's 5. And then what happens is the group will, and the questions, basically every question, the requirement is that the answer has to be answerable through RP session.
Okay.
Right? You have to be able to role play to find the answer to that question.
Okay.
So how do they meet? Right? And then you jump into a scene and then you find out how they met. Right? And typically I would say the role play would take maybe a one shot, like one session or a couple sessions.
Okay.
Like a short
Okay.
couple sessions to discover the answer to that question. So when you have those 5 questions, whatever, then your group picks a question, right? And they pick a DM for that session or for that question,
Oh.
right?
Okay.
Because there is no overarching story yet necessarily, right? I know you hate this. You hate this.
I don't hate it.
It makes you uncomfortable. So
That's my secret.
and the DM,
I'm always uncomfortable.
The DM is only there basically to roleplay the world in those sessions, in that question, and to facilitate the discovery of the answer, because someone needs to be the DM,
Okay.
right? Like someone needs to like, I'll roll this.
Yeah,
roll
that's
that.
where it goes. Yeah, that's
Right.
That's where I get off the boat. Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
Right? Because of, anyways. And optional, you can have the same DM across it,
Mhm.
all of them, but optional is you can have a different DM every question,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But you all choose the questions together.
Mhm.
It's a different set of questions every time you finish a question and get an answer.
It's like D&D sessions against humanity.
Kind of.
We all throw in something and we pick the best one.
Exactly, right?
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be linear either,
It ain't gonna be.
right? And it might be fun because it's a series of one-shots then that come together in the end to form a actual long campaign story. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Right. Again, there's some cons, right? It's highly improvisational. It's highly emergent, that story. Highly emergent because it comes from nothing. There's no grand plan necessarily. So everyone gets to consume it equally.
Mhm.
Instead of the DM, I know the whole story, I'm just feeding it to you guys now. Now everyone gets to be the DM. And no DM knows the entire story. Right?
Mm.
It could be that the first question was how they met. The last question was how they ended.
Mm.
Right? Like how they all died.
Mhm.
The person died, how that person died. This was the greatest triumph. Like, what was the greatest triumph? And then you roleplay that.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, we roleplayed this triumph, and it was they redeemed a demonic tiger that was on the brink of destroying goblin kind.
Demonic tigers.
Yeah, right.
They'll get you.
Right, and they redeemed him, and they saved the goblin world. Right, and then you're like, okay, then where's it? There's lots of questions now between how they met, because they met as humans,
Yes.
and now they're all goblins. For
Yes.
example, what happened? Right, then you go and you ask that question.
Yes.
And you keep adding more details to it. Then you sort of find the story out together.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The con of this, though, is that emergent stories can be super tricky to make it compelling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what this works best with is if you concentrate on sort of character stories and the relationships between the characters, kind of like a sitcom or like a serialized television show, like cop shows and whatever, right? Like every episode's different, a sort of mini story.
Yeah.
But there's an overarching sort of character progression across all the episodes or that season, right?
Yes.
And there is one big bad guy, and then at the end of the season, it gets resolved, right? But each episode is sort of complete on its own.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that's the question and answer structure.
Okay.
I mean, it's great because no DM has to do all the work on his own the whole time.
Right.
I think a lot of DMs don't like this idea.
So I'm yes-anding because I'm forcing myself to.
Oh, good for you.
I think that this would be an interesting thing. I'm going to call it a thing because I don't know if it's a campaign yet. But if you were to have, say, your group is 5 people, right? 4 PCs plus the DM, which means you have a 5-character party because you're switching out who the DM is.
It's 5.
So it's 5 characters.
It's not 4 and a DM. It's 5 DMs and 5 players.
Well, that's exactly what I would do. Is everybody needs to understand that they're a DM, and in doing so, together you would decide who the BBEG is, and I would task every single person there to create their own story from alpha to omega, and run with their questions and introduce parts of their story whenever they're in the hot seat. And so you have 5 stories that will continue to bring you closer to Demon Tigress.
Right.
And you pick up...
Or maybe it's Demon Moose. One guy is Demon Moose. The other guy is Angel Bear.
Oh, okay. A Demon Moose. You had me thinking that we were going to do the pantheon of evil Canadians.
Evil Canadian.
But no, if you had 5 different stories... Right.
Chaotic Gopher.
Chaotic Gopher. Anyway. If you had 5 different stories that each of the DMs were trying to tell, but understanding that they are not hogging, quote unquote, the DM spotlight. So when it's their turn to sit in the hot seat, they've got something prepped that they can throw in there that's part of their story. And then people can say like, hey, Sean, what's going on right now is really interesting. Right. You need to improv because you need to answer the question that's going on.
Right.
But we want to find out what's in this mini arc. So Sean's going to be the DM for the next 3 or 4 sessions because we want to figure out this little bit. Right. And then you figure out that little bit and then you're like, that's super cool. We're moving on. Right.
Right.
And so you can cycle through. I don't know if it would work. You know how I feel about disjointed things not pairing up nicely with the overall campaign arc. But if you have a bunch of mini arcs that are run by multiple people, I think it could work. Everybody would have to be on the level, though.
No, absolutely. Like I said, it's so easy for it to go wrong because the emergence of the story, the narrative, can just go nowhere.
Yes.
Right? Like, there's a reason why D20 and Critical Role do really well as shows. It's because all the players are on the level.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
As well as the DM.
Yes.
Right? Like it'd be much different if you had Mercer with like non-professional D&D improvisers
Sure.
and voice actors,
Yes.
right? So,
I agree.
So no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know, I agree with you. But I sort of like this structure again because it's a mystery to everyone, kind of.
A little bit. I also think that it's kind of cool if you have 5 different stories going on, and then the players get to choose collectively what is most interesting to them.
Yeah,
and what like at the beginning, every player / DM throws a hook.
Yep.
In as well.
Well, that's
right?
the questions, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, and it's the players. You have to make a record exactly of what is going on, and then everyone needs to sort of know it when they put the questions in.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think a BBG will naturally emerge.
I think if you agree on the BBG, that's fine too.
I think
that meta knowledge you can suppress.
Eventually, yeah, and I think eventually you'll know. Like everyone's like, no, it's probably this guy.
Well, it's the exploration. Like we all agree that the BBG is going to be a red dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, great. That's it. How you get to the red dragon being the BBG of your individual story, that becomes what we want to unveil.
I mean, but what the interesting part is someone could submit the question at some point. It's like, how do the heroes find out who is actually controlling the red dragon?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, if everyone's like, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's bringing microscope in, right? Where everything is written in canon and nothing is sacred.
And then you can go, right? But in this way, you can choose and vote as a group.
Yeah.
So you won't have random stuff like everyone got turned to stuffed toys and running around now in the world of stuffed toys, right? Unless that's where everyone wants to go. In which case, great.
Immune to bludgeoning, vulnerable to fire. Damn.
So yeah,
not a good trade.
Yeah, those are my 2 little examples of how a different structure in D&D might look like.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like your first, me being
like the first one.
I like it much more.
I know you do.
Not to say that the second one is trash, but
it's trash. Not trash. It's just the person who came up with it.
Like and subscribe to Sean's Shame. It's
our best episode yet.
So what, like 50 likes, and we'll just like slap a pie in your face and call it a day?
I mean, I'll do it, I guess.
Do it for the likes. Do it for the subs. No, you want subs because you're here for intellectual reasons.
Oof.
And because you love D&D. I think I'm going to answer your questions with some of my own questions.
Okay.
Mr. Discover the Answer. Because I think one of the things that you're pushing up against here is like kind of the fundamental rules of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so no, I'm gonna talk about my ideas first before I kind of give closing ideas, I think.
Okay.
So I think fundamentally changing the structure of a story. I've got a few ideas. The first one I think is very difficult, like the one that you just proposed.
The second one, the Discover the Answer?
Discovering the Answer.
Yeah.
I think
it could be so awesome, but it could be
super. It could be super cool. It could be super. It also could be hot garbage.
Yeah.
And that's okay because you can shake out the nuts and bolts and you can try again.
Like this player,
yeah,
definitely a bolt.
I think you need some experienced people to do this idea as well.
Yeah.
But the idea that I would put forth is the time yo-yo. And the time yo-yo, is in fact that back and forth motion. So this is the inspiration that I'm taking, that biomimicry, except yo-yos ain't exist in nature, but they do now. Is essentially you start much like that action-packed curve that gets you straight into the action. You can start your campaign at the BBEG fight. You can start your campaign after the BBEG fight. You can start your campaign anywhere you want. And as you go through, you are constantly doing vignettes. You are constantly doing flashbacks. You are constantly going backwards to figure out the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, why, and how. Did you get certain things that you now have in the quote unquote present? Right. So You feel the heat licking at your face from the volcanic, layer. Okay, great. Sean, pass me the spike. I know you've held it for so long, but I need the spike now. What's the spike? Boom.
Right.
We're going backwards in time to figure out what the spike is. Or we're going back in time to figure out why Sean's character wants to hold on to it so much. Or we're figuring out there's a lot. And essentially, this is kind of looking at those multiple woven stories where they start you off with, you might be asking yourself how I ended up like this kind of moments, right? And then it goes back, 3 weeks earlier, and then it describes what's going on. But having the improv agility and fortitude to kind of create canonical lore on the fly and make something that's going to exist both in the present and in the past, and you fill out what's happened behind you, kind of is the backwards discover the answer. Because it has a fundamental kind of saying where I'm RP asking. I'm not generating the questions from something that we submitted, but I'm going to ask like, this is so much worse than the time we spent on the hill, right? And and then we talk about what happened on the hill, right? And it feels like a nightmare for the DM. I also question how much player agency is necessarily involved. But all the player agency comes in the form of setting their own canonical anchors. And it might be a fun experience to attempt to do something. Now, obviously, we've seen these sorts of things where, heist movies often do this, right? Where we get some of the story, but then we jump ahead a little bit and then we see what happened. And then we have to go back and understand why what we saw isn't what we saw and all the things, right? Playing with that forward and backward timeline or existing in two timelines kind of simultaneously and having one affect the other. Like you said, I think this gives a lot of emergent possibilities.
Yes.
Of really kind of cool things. And you can give yourself anything in the future as long as you can explain it in the past. Right. And so it does take some of the control away from the DM, but also the DM has to fill in these blanks with everyone as a truly collaborative story that you're all telling together. And the DM really kind of sits back a little bit and becomes
the DM prep is much lower. in all of ours. Except the tiered play.
I don't know. I don't know. Because you need to be ready for anything.
Well, but you have to have knowledge as a DM and be super flexible.
Yeah.
But you can't quite prep for things because it's emergent.
Yes.
Right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
So.
But it could be fun. I mean, you just open up with the narration of the fighter getting bashed across the face with a mace. He goes, I can't believe we got this far.
Yeah.
I remember when I met you. And then you kind of cut from that fight and go all the way back to the beginning of how did the five adventurers meet?
Right.
Right. And kind of that back and forth time yo-yoing effect. I think could be a fun one. Like I said, you're going to need a lot of people who are confident and competent at what they're doing and really kind of looking at that clear razor black and white line of what's good, what's not good, and trying to be consistent with it. Yeah, that is number 3 on my top 3 list of things I want to do.
It's really interesting, that idea. It makes me think of a slight variation on it, the time travel thing, but like mimicking the structure from roguelike games would be interesting.
Like a Groundhog's Day?
Kind of. Yeah. Like you go and then if someone dies, everyone goes back to the beginning.
Yes.
Right? And then you get to do it again. Well, maybe don't repeat everything. You say, go back to this point. We'll do everything the same except for this part.
Right.
Right? And then
that's actually a really good way of skipping a lot of the monotony.
Well, exactly. Like, we're gonna say the same thing to the same people. Yeah.
You need to write it down.
Yes.
These are the steps that we're taking for day 1. Submit that. That's going to be locked in. Now we go back. No, something in day 4 doesn't make sense, but we changed it on day 1. God damn it. We got to go redo day 1.
Yeah, right? It's like a puzzle,
so you have to write out everything so that there is control to say, we want to jump up to this spot.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's noon on day 3.
And like all the characters remember all the different versions that they do.
The PCs remember. The NPCs don't.
Well, maybe the NPCs don't, but the PCs do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Groundhog's Day.
Right? So it might be fun.
It could be fun as long as you are a puzzle-oriented person. If you're an action-oriented person, you're just going to end up killing all the townsfolk because there's no consequences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, then you'd have to set up a good motivation for characters and players.
That's a session 0, right? That's a line.
There are nuts and bolts that you have to test out. Like, what do you do about levels? Like, we've gained 5 levels. When we revert, do we lose those 5 levels?
No, because the PCs don't forget.
They don't forget, but a fighter, it's like, I gained 4 strength. Do I lose it now? Like, am I all of a sudden just 4 strength more buff, even though it was now 2 years ago? Right? Like, there's stuff.
Hand wavy, whatever, right? You could just say, yeah, no, all ASIs are feat based. There is no increase to your stats. You only increase your knowledge.
Yeah.
Because your brain goes back in time, but your body dies.
Or you could be like,
Morty.
or you just get rid of all that stuff. You have to regain it, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, who knows?
Interesting.
Like I said, it's things you need to think about.
Yeah.
But anyways,
I think
maybe think about that.
Another way to keep this controlled is just to say, okay, guys, our final fight is when you guys are level 3. You're starting at level 1 right now.
Oh, okay,
so I'm going to limit the scope. So this is not a huge 3-year epic campaign that we're playing all time hoppy. No, we're playing like a 10 session story, and we're writing it backwards and forwards.
No, definitely that'd be fun to start with. Like, no, the right beginning, session 1, it's BBG battle, and you're just dying.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to survive that one.
Right.
Right? And then revert back, and you're like, oh, geez, right? Let's figure this out. And you go and you die.
Oh, your roguelike one? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Anyways, yeah.
Number 2.
Yep.
I think that you, as a system, you limit the scope of vision to 1 room. So it is a essentially West March campaign or an all off-table campaign, except for the roleplay that happens in this 1 room. You pick a room that is specifically important to the entire campaign, be that a throne room, the ritual chamber, that's the local town's kind of prayer spot, whatever it is. You pick a super important location to the campaign that's going to be traveled through a lot, and all of the RP happens in this 1 room, and you just get to, the other players only get to experience other people's stories through what they hear, see, and say in this 1 room. Everything else is off table.
How does that work?
That's it. That, like I said, it's like a West Marches.
And do other people play the other players?
Yes.
Are there the characters coming through that area?
You play your PC, but the only time you're RPing your PC as a live thing is when you are in that room. So like I said, if this is perhaps this is a major negotiation spot that also happens to be the nexus of an ancient ley line, blah, blah,
so
blah.
So like
blah.
you would be like, okay, now it's like 3 months later and you come back, you've done a bunch of stuff.
Correct.
Oh, weird.
Or you could call for a meeting between these 2 kingdoms and, okay, these 2 people show up on week 2. Okay, cool. Awesome. We need to have this RP'd out.
Interesting.
But whether you had your own organizations, you had your own kingdoms, you had your own whatever, and everybody only RP, the only RP that happens is in this 1 room.
I feel like it's like that board game diplomacy.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Much like your organizational multi-tiered system kind of has a diplomacy element. It has a little bit of that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like you go and you just chat for a while, and you'll leave and you just do stuff. And no one knows what you did until you come back next time.
Correct.
Interesting.
Correct. And then everything. So that one is, I think, more keen to political, unless, of course, you raid said throne room or ancient temple or whatnot, and 2 armies show up. And then you have your BBG fight is between PCs or PCs and the dragon, whatever it is.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be.
It could be, this is the tavern. And it's the last safe building in the village, in the kingdom, because it's zombie apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you have to go and do stuff.
You have to go on missions. You have to go, and it's all skill checks and rolls. And
you come back, and then there's RP, and there's just, right? Like, oh, no, you should give us this. Give us more food because you did this, but I made weapons and whatever, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So an interesting take on kind of sending your PCs out on missions, but always having to come back to this 1 spot, I think is an interesting shift.
Yeah.
And I suppose kind of doing object permanence was where I was going with that one. I think making the central figure, this is idea number one that I think I would love to play or design, is you follow an item. So I would call this one living legend lore. Okay. So like the legend lore spell where you get to learn the stories of an item and the history and all of its stuff. If you were to take an item and then walk it through the multiple parties, walk it through the ages that it's been in use. If this is, and I think this works better, if you pick like a legendary magical item, or create a legendary magical item for those of you who want to homebrew, and you follow the story of what the item does. Because the item needs to eventually probably either be the MacGuffin or lead to being the thing that is required to assist the final party in defeating the final BBEG. But what you are doing is you are telling the story of this one item. You're writing the lore as you go. So first group, 5 PCs go off and do something, and you do a mini arc, and then they lose it. It gets dropped in a river or something, right? And then it gets fished out by a fisherman whose son then takes up the blade, and then you follow him and his friends going on a different adventure. And then it gets lost in some goblin caves, perhaps. And then the goblins get slayed by some bandits, who then get slayed by some more adventurers. And and it gets picked up, and you just follow the story of the sword as it leads its way, in this case, sword or weapon or whatever, as it leads its way around the kingdom, around the country, around the globe, dealing with certain things, and all of it's told from that perspective. Now, bonus points, if you make this an intelligent item, because it is so powerful, then DMs, you have, and this is probably my only argument that I've thought of, you have a DM PC. Because you get to play the artifact interacting with the PCs. For those of you guys who
don't know, Byron is resolutely against DM PCs.
Except for when I thought of this, and I thought, oh, there might be a case here. Because the DM gets to control the world, and in controlling the world controls the object that's in the world that the party interacts with. And so pros of this, I think you get to play multiple characters in this campaign. You get to try out all those ideas. You get to, hey, just make a level 3 character. We're going to play that for a few sessions. Make a level 7 character. We're going to play that for a few sessions. Oh, make a level 5 character. We're going to play that for a few. Make a level 17 character. We're going to play that. You can hop around. There is no linear progression required. Because the questions that you're answering or the plots that you're creating are not dependent necessarily on a linear progression through the levels of the game. You're going through the levels of the plot. And so fixing your gaze to that item and what happens in the immediate vicinity around that item, I think could be an interesting way to tell a story.
Yes. I think so.
Processing.
Yeah, processing. It might, I think one of the difficulties in that system is that because the players are playing different characters all the time, and they're probably given to them by the DM?
I don't think so. I think it's fair to just say, hey guys, create a level this. Right. In the world that we've created, that this is existing in, these characters are going to be in this province or this kingdom. Create something appropriate.
And because you have so many different characters, you're not necessarily going to be invested in any of them.
It's not to say they can't come back.
Sure. But you know what I mean? Like, you won't. And so you, on one hand, it's great because then you can be brutal to them.
Treat your PCs like NPCs?
Yeah, for the sake of the stories. And you should.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right? Because it's not your story anymore as a player. Right? And that's a fundamental shift from traditional 5e, whereas it's you play a character and it's your story.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
It's not your story. It's entirely the DM story. Because the DM is the protagonist.
See, now, I don't necessarily know. DM is A, not the. Because you can have multiple protagonists as effectively supporting characters. There also is nothing to say that, in the level 3 party, we see Sir Romulus the Bold.
Right.
The level 7 party, which is like maybe 2 or 3 campaign arcs later, Sir Romulus the Bold regains the blade.
Right.
You're like, oh, what the hell happened to him? And he's all scarred up and he's all effed up. He's like, I've been looking for you. You left me.
Yeah. So it's not without value. I think it's really cool, actually. But what the players get from it is fundamentally different from what they get from traditional 5e, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's why you're playing a new system.
Correct.
Because you want new things out of on a 5e. So it's but yeah, so going into a system like that, as long as you're aware of that kind of shift, it could be really cool. Yeah.
I think it could be fun. It also kind of, one of the fears that some people have is that they get locked into something for too long. And they get that itch. They want to create something new. This does satisfy it. But I 100% agree. It is way harder to create a protagonist main character PC. Right?
Yeah.
It's super difficult. It's super difficult.
Well, also, the PCs that the players create will necessarily be more shallow.
Perhaps.
Because you can't, well,
they can
unless you're real dedicated and you have like all the time to like just create like super flash out characters every time you have new characters.
I don't think so, because you can't get to know them quick enough unless everybody wears their heart on the sleeve, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It also opens up the ability for you to play heroes, villains, heroes, villains, heroes as the blade or as the item gets passed back and forth. Right. Between good guys, bad guys, good guys, bad guys, or good guys, good guys, good guys, bad guys, good guys, good guys. Right.
Yeah.
Like I think it frees up a lot of things that you can do because you're not then married to something in telling a story.
Yeah.
It could also be that you could have multiple DMs as well. If you want to switch it off because this DM wants to tell this part of the story, that DM wants to tell that part of the story. Yeah. It opens up freedom for who's in the hot seat.
No, it's cool. No,
I think it could be a fun one. So please feel free to steal. But if you do, let us know because we might want to play in those campaigns.
Right. Or if you want to DM those, like, let me know. I would love to play in any of these.
He might even get allowed to play.
I'll figure it out.
Make it work.
Yeah.
Make it work. That's the structural change.
One of the Seans.
One of the Seans will be there.
Yeah.
But I think all of these things are bringing us, like I said, back to the fundamentals of boundaries, right? We're pushing in different areas to get into a space where we are attempting to find the edge of the world, right? In this case, we're not worried about just staring into the void. We have leapt off the edge and we are falling. We are not failing, right? In the attempt of doing it, there is merit. And we understand that, there are problems with what we just talked about. Yeah, make your campaign like a wave. What the hell does that mean, Byron? I don't know. You're going to have to figure it out and you're going to have to shake out all that stuff, right?
Just sine curve, right?
Is it? No.
Sine wave?
Sine wave? I don't know what wave is.
No.
In Hulu, it's the
that.
But anyway, bring the fish in.
Yeah. I'm Asian, so the math is strong with this one.
The math is strong.
Even though it's not.
And don't worry necessarily, depending on the scope of what you're doing. Don't worry about like plagiarism versus inspiration when you're building this kind of stuff. This is structure, not story, right? Take whatever you want. And I think it's got less connotation to it when you choose to plagiarize a structure versus a story.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I really like how they did that. Cool.
Well, because the structures are so fundamental.
Correct.
It's like you can't patent chewing.
Trident would love to try.
Right? You can't because it's just so fundamental.
Sorry, Trident.
Right? To that activity of being human and eating.
Yes.
Right? So it's like if that were the case, then like every 3-act play is plagiarizing. Like it's not. It's too fundamental.
Correct.
So don't worry about structural plagiarism.
No. And so, like we said before, and
my son's plagiarizing my DNA. How dare he?
Oof. You better get on that.
I know, right?
Well, wait till he's got some assets to take.
Right?
Just charge him.
Paying interest.
It's hilarious. It's coming. Watch out, Cassies. Get out there and try and make mistakes. Try and get into these areas where you get stuck. And remember, if you get stuck, to revert to the idea of play, right?
Yep.
Get rid of what's holding you back and just accept the leap of faith. right? Accept that you're dropping into somewhere where you don't know where you're going and you don't know what's going to happen.
It's like every episode of Caffeine and Cantrips, guys.
Every single one, we take the leap of faith with you.
Like, what are we doing? We have no idea.
We are talking about whatever Sean.
Yeah.
And then,
are people going to like it? Who knows? They're going to get it.
They're going to get it. And hopefully they do. Because we think that there's something here.
You want to get it? Come get it.
Come get it.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, a great place to call it, because we need you to let us know what type of non-standard shenanigans do you want to get up to at your table,
or have done already, and how to go. I want to. That'd be super interesting to know.
Yeah.
Leave a comment.
Or leave 2. Yeah. Leave a non-standard, non-traditional comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Break it up into 6 parts.
Let's play D&D in the comments.
Yeah. Ask the question.
A West March campaign in the comments.
In the comments. Oof. Ask the questions, right? Let's play Discover the Answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. I like it a lot.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that was a journey.
It was.
Fun. And let us know how our ideas were. Criticize them. I would love to see criticisms.
Yeah.
But hopefully it was a fun ride. Now that we're on the other side, thanks for joining us here at Caffeine and Cantrips.
Oh, you can't take it,
Sean.
You can't take it. I'm Byron, your Fortress Master.
Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Or else. Eat your own medicine.
Yeah, that was awesome. I was like, I love it when a joke comes back.
Yeah, I had to. I've been waiting 90 minutes.
The whole time.
I got you for 90 minutes, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, brother.
Gotta sweat some more.
Oh, sweat some more.
I don't know how they're so oily and sweaty all the time, those WWF wrestlers.
Baby oil and
I think they were born that way.
Vigorous KY application. Did you know there's a Krispy Kreme KY
Maybe he was
now?
born that way.
Maybe it's baby oil? Gross. But also John Cena.
Call us.
We can't.
He's here the whole time.
He's totally here.
He's like, guys, love D&D, but I can't
We're
say
gonna
anything.
die. That'd be awesome. Do any WWE stars play?
Probably.
If you know, I can't imagine that this is probably going to be better somewhere. If you know any WWE superstars, at them in our comments, and let's get them on here.
John Cena is actually at every D&D table.